And welcome back here to Live Now from Fox. I'm your host, Mike Page. Thanks again for joining us, continuing to bring you some of the day's biggest top stories and headlines. Next up, we want to take you out to Colorado. That's where federal authorities have unveiled new charges against a violent Venezuelan gang, TREN de Aragua, also known as TDA. 30 people have been indicted, including several gang members and leaders. So let's go right now out.
What if I told you that one of South America's most brutal prison gangs didn't set up shop in the neon-lit streets of Miami or the concrete jungle of New York City, but in the quiet, tree-lined suburbs of Colorado? That's exactly what federal authorities uncovered in a historic operation that's being called the largest crackdown on the TREN de Aragua gang in U.S. history. Federal agents from ICE, the FBI, ATF, and DEA seized 69 firearms, including a machine gun modified for full auto fire, and arrested 28 gang members linked to murder-for-hire schemes, sprawling drug pipelines, and ruthless extortion rings. But here's the detail that left even seasoned prosecutors stunned. These weren't shadowy criminals lurking in back alleys. They were embedded in suburban apartment complexes, living among working-class families, immigrants paying rent, and kids playing in courtyards. This is the story of how a Venezuelan prison gang tried to turn Colorado into its American stronghold, and how federal law enforcement smashed their operation before the nightmare could spread further. Let's dive in. What happened in Aurora, Colorado, is bigger than a single bust. It's a wake-up call about whether America can stop foreign gangs from taking root before they spread like a virus. The investigation kicked off with a chilling murder-for-hire plot that shocked even the most hardened undercover agents who've seen their share of cartel brutality. TREN de Aragua members didn't just agree to kill 2 people for $15,000. They casually offered a bonus service for an extra $5,000, delivering the victims' severed heads as proof of the deed. This wasn't empty bravado or street-level posturing. Agents reported that these gangsters spoke about murder with the same nonchalance as someone discussing a weekend golf game. That chilling indifference set the tone for the horrors prosecutors would later uncover, a business model built on raw, unapologetic brutality. Over the next 10 months, a multi-agency task force of ICE, FBI, ATF, and DEA operatives worked tirelessly, embedding themselves deep within TREN de Aragua's criminal network, which stretched from the suburbs of Denver to the cartels of Colombia. What they discovered was nothing short of terrifying. This wasn't just a local gang moving drugs or guns across state lines. TREN de Aragua's leadership in South America was directing operations in real time, orchestrating a sophisticated pipeline that funneled drugs, weapons, and terror into the heart of America. By the time the operation culminated on July 30th, 2025, federal prosecutors had secured 30 indictments, targeting not just foot soldiers, but 3 high-ranking gang leaders, 1 in the U.S. and 2 in Colombia. The charges painted a picture of industrial-scale trafficking backed by military-grade firepower, and the evidence was undeniable. 69 seized firearms, including a fully automatic weapon, alongside stashes of fentanyl, methamphetamine, cocaine, and a trendy synthetic drug known as pink cocaine, or Tusi. This wasn't small-time hustling. This was cartel-level warfare being waged from the unassuming apartment complexes of suburban Colorado. The epicenter of TREN de Aragua's Colorado operation was the Ivy Crossing Apartments in Aurora, a once ordinary housing complex that transformed almost overnight into a gang-controlled fortress. Residents reported armed men patrolling hallways, banging on doors, and demanding extra rent in cash, protection money to ensure their safety. Mothers hurried their children past men openly carrying rifles. Some families stopped letting their kids play outside altogether, fearing stray bullets or worse. When surveillance videos leaked online, showing Venezuelan gang members brandishing weapons inside the complex. The footage went viral, sparking national outrage. Yet, astonishingly, local politicians initially dismissed these warnings as fear-mongering, accusing critics of exaggerating the threat for political gain during election season. In televised debates, claims that Venezuelan gangs were seizing control of apartment buildings were mocked as hysteria, brushed off as overblown rhetoric meant to inflame anti-immigrant sentiment. But behind the political posturing, the reality on the ground was grim. Immigrant families, many of whom had fled violence in their home countries, were living under constant threat. Aurora's police chief later admitted that TREN de Aragua's strategy was parasitic. They targeted vulnerable communities, often immigrant-heavy neighborhoods, and drained them through intimidation and extortion, expanding their influence like a malignant infection. By the time prosecutors had enough evidence to act, the gang had already stockpiled an arsenal of weapons, mapped out drug trafficking routes, and planned assassinations, not in some remote cartel stronghold, but in the quiet suburbs of Colorado. The disconnect between political denial and the lived experiences of residents allowed TREN de Aragua to dig in deeper, entrenching themselves in plain sight. It took nearly a year of painstaking undercover work to unravel the network they'd built, exposing a war zone hidden behind the facade of suburban normalcy. The bust itself played out like a scene from a high-stakes narco thriller. Over 40 coordinated operations unfolded across Colorado, with federal agents raiding stash houses, intercepting drug and gun shipments, and posing as buyers to gather airtight evidence. They didn't just target low-level operatives. They went after the leadership structure running TREN de Aragua's American pipeline. By the time the arrests were made, it was clear this was no ordinary crime spree. This was an international criminal enterprise, with tendrils stretching from Aurora's apartment complexes to Miami's bustling ports, Chicago's gritty streets, and the jungles of Colombia. On the same day that 28 gang members were hauled out of Colorado housing units in handcuffs, Colombian authorities, acting on U.S. intelligence, arrested 2 alleged TREN de Aragua leaders who were coordinating weapons and drug trafficking from abroad. That detail stunned observers. Colorado wasn't the gang's final destination. It was a critical hub in a transnational network that was already pumping fentanyl, meth, and pink cocaine into multiple U.S. states. Federal prosecutors described the operation as a turning point, proof that law enforcement must think globally to combat gangs that no longer respect borders. The evidence was staggering. 69 firearms, including automatic weapons, tied to shootings, carjackings, and robberies in Denver and Aurora. The drugs seized, fentanyl, methamphetamine, cocaine, and Tusi, pointed to a sophisticated trafficking operation designed to flood American streets with deadly substances. But beyond the guns and drugs, what set TREN de Aragua apart was their audacity. They weren't just trying to make money. They were testing whether they could transplant their Venezuelan prison playbook to American soil, using terror, extortion, and open violence to establish control. Their model was rooted in fear, not secrecy, and it thrived by silencing communities through intimidation. To understand how TREN de Aragua managed to embed itself so deeply in the United States, you have to go back to its origins in Venezuela's collapsing prison system. Born in the notorious Tocoron prison, the gang transformed penitentiaries into criminal fiefdoms. Inmates didn't just run the prisons, they turned them into fully functioning criminal enterprises. They dug tunnels, stockpiled grenades, and rocket-propelled grenades, RPGs, and even built restaurants, nightclubs, and makeshift banks inside prison walls. TREN de Aragua became a state within a state, running extortion rackets, drug smuggling, and human trafficking operations with military-grade firepower. Under the leadership of figures like Hector Guerrero Flores, who remains a wanted fugitive with a $5 million U.S. bounty on his head, the gang expanded beyond prison walls, seizing control of gold mines, drug corridors, and clandestine border crossings across Latin America. When Venezuela's economy imploded in the mid-2010s, sparking a mass migration crisis, TREN de Aragua saw an opportunity. They slipped members into the waves of migrants crossing Latin America and arriving at the U.S. border, some posing as asylum seekers to blend into shelters. Once inside the U.S., particularly in sanctuary cities like Aurora, they began recruiting among vulnerable immigrant communities, exploiting economic desperation and fear of deportation. That's how Aurora, a city with a significant immigrant population, ended up on their radar. Federal estimates now suggest TREN de Aragua has a presence in at least 17 states, with roughly 600 known members operating openly in the U.S. Unlike older gangs like MS-13, which often kept a lower profile, TREN de Aragua flaunted its brutality. Videos of torture, extortion schemes in apartment complexes, and sex trafficking along migrant corridors became their calling card. Their strategy wasn't about staying hidden. It was about dominating through fear, terrorizing both native-born Americans and the very migrant communities they infiltrated. For the families who fled Venezuela's chaos, the nightmare had simply followed them to America. Many of these immigrants had left their homeland to escape the very violence and extortion that TREN de Aragua brought with them. In Aurora, residents described living in constant fear, with armed gang members demanding protection money and threatening violence if they refused. Some families were forced to pay hundreds of dollars a month just to park their cars or keep their apartments. Others faced threats of kidnapping or worse. The gang's presence wasn't just a criminal issue, it was a humanitarian crisis, as vulnerable communities were preyed upon by the very people who shared their language and culture. The Colorado crackdown dealt a significant blow to TREN de Aragua, but it also raised troubling questions about the future. Prosecutors celebrated a 75% drop in service calls at Ivy Crossing apartments after the bust, a sign that families could finally live without the constant threat of violence. But other apartment complexes in Aurora were already scarred by the gang's presence. One complex, The Edge at Lowry, was boarded up entirely after residents were forced to relocate due to escalating gang activity, including a brutal kidnapping and torture incident that left a Venezuelan couple traumatized. Investigators admitted that Colorado was just one piece of a much larger puzzle. TREN de Aragua's network extended to Kansas City, Miami, Chicago, and beyond, with evidence suggesting they were coordinating with other transnational criminal organizations, including Mexico's Sinaloa Cartel and Colombia's National Liberation Army, ELN. The scale of the threat led federal prosecutors to use language typically reserved for foreign terrorists. They described TREN de Aragua as a dangerous transnational threat, vowing to pursue further indictments and dismantle the gang's infrastructure across the U.S. The designation of TREN de Aragua as a foreign terrorist organization in February 2025 under an executive order signed by President Donald Trump underscored the severity of the situation. This wasn't just about street crime. It was about a criminal enterprise that operated with the sophistication and ruthlessness of a terrorist network. The seizures of 69 firearms, including automatic weapons, and the arrests of 28 members, including 3 leaders, were a testament to the operation's success. But they also highlighted the challenge ahead, rooting out a gang that had already spread to multiple states and operated with international backing. The political battle over TREN de Aragua is far from over. Critics on one side argue that labeling the gang a terrorist organization and linking it to immigration fuels xenophobic narratives, unfairly targeting Venezuelan migrants who are themselves victims of the gang's violence. Others contend that the evidence, 69 firearms, drugs flooding communities, and murder-for-hire plots proves that America ignored the threat for too long, allowing it to fester in vulnerable neighborhoods. Aurora's story changed the conversation by exposing how Venezuelan gangsters were running apartment complexes like prison yards, preying on the very communities they claim to represent. ICE and the FBI made it clear that protecting immigrant families from these predators isn't anti-immigrant, it's a moral and legal necessity. The fight against TREN de Aragua is just beginning, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Whether America treats them as common criminals or a foreign terrorist organization could determine how many more cities face the same nightmare that unfolded in Aurora. This isn't just a Colorado story. It's a warning about how quickly foreign gangs can embed themselves in American neighborhoods when political denial clouds reality. The Ivy Crossing apartments, once a symbol of suburban safety, became a battleground where families lived in fear of armed extortionists. The viral videos of gang members patrolling hallways with rifles weren't exaggerations. They were a glimpse into a reality that too many dismissed until it was undeniable. ICE, the FBI, ATF, and DEA may have crushed this particular pipeline, but the larger question looms. Does America have the resolve to keep fighting at this scale before TREN de Aragua, or another gang like it, resurfaces somewhere else? The operation in Colorado was a victory, but it's not the end of the story. The gang's transnational reach, from Aurora's suburbs to Colombia's cartels, means that law enforcement must stay one step ahead, not just in one city, but across the country and beyond. The 75% drop in service calls at Ivy Crossing is a start, but with other complexes still reeling from gang activity and new hubs potentially emerging in other states, the threat remains. So, what do you think? Should TREN de Aragua be officially designated as a terrorist organization, or is that a step too far? Should law enforcement focus on dismantling their networks locally, or is a global strategy the only way to stop a transnational threat like this? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because this conversation is far from over. The story of TREN de Aragua in Colorado is a stark reminder that crime doesn't respect borders, and neither can the fight against it. If you want to stay ahead of the stories that mainstream outlets might shy away from, hit that subscribe button, ring the bell, and join me every week as we dig into the battles shaping America's future. The question isn't just what happened in Aurora, it's what happens next.